Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today I have a layout process for you featuring foiling, and honestly I almost scrapped this video because of so many challenges, but I didn't, and I'll talk about why. First off, this layout came about because earlier this month I talked about tips and techniques on adding foiling to your projects without needing machines, and I didn't have a chance to feature a layout in that video, and so that's why this video is here. Now, the reason I almost scrapped this video is because despite my tips and tricks video going very well, I had a lot of challenges this time around. And I thought, you know what, there is value in watching me struggle with something and also watching me come up with plan Bs to salvage the project, so let's do it. I am creating my layout using lots of tiny photos from a crafting event that I did back in the spring, and these are pictures of the projects that I did from that event. And I wanted to document that. So I categorize all those photos and how I want them to be. And I'm going to make a 2-page spread using my counterfeit kit here. I'm pulling out papers that I think will work, and I go with some artsy, fun, colorful papers to show off this layout. So here is the start of my double-page spread, and I'm coming up with other bits and pieces to carry over from one side to the other, so that I have some continuity. And at this event, we actually created this card with some foiling products, and that was part of the inspiration behind my foiling video, because I really do like foiling, but the cost of different foiling machine systems out there are just too expensive. At any rate, as I create this layout, I am compartmentalizing areas so that each set of photos from different days of the event are going to be held together by these methods. I'm using a lot of tags in order to do that. And again, I'm taking pieces from the left side and carrying it over to the right side. Now that upper section of photos is just general event photos, and I'm going to frame those out, and that's going to be one of my foiling techniques. And I'm also going to end up framing out these different compartmentalized tag areas of these day photos, and that will be a different foiling technique. And we'll talk along the way how each of these techniques worked out or didn't, and what I did to shift gears in that case. With the structure of my layout in place, I'm ready to start foiling, and the first thing I want to do is to create a frame with these toner sheets, and that was mistake number one, because if you're not using a machine to foil large flat surfaces, you're going to have some challenges. Now, one of the challenges I had was also in my technique of using that, and so we'll talk about both of those. So at first I start off with this large frame, and I will end up trimming it down a little bit more, and then I choose which foils I want. And you can see how much narrower that frame is. And yet with a large flat surface of foiling, it often tends to leave gaps in the process. And you'll see that here. But here is my second mistake. I covered up my project with a piece of scratch paper to protect it from my iron, but then I just ironed right over both the toner and the paper that was touching the toner. And since toner is heat activated, everything started sticking, both to the printer paper as my protective sheet and to the iron. So that was mistake number one. And so I am recovering from mistake number one by making sure that I cover up everything entirely. Now that white gap in my toner paper is not salvageable really, although I thought maybe I could put some glue in there and then fill it in with more foil after the glue had dried. But with the other challenges here, and you can see when I peel off that foil how there's still gaps left in the foiling. That's because the foil tends to wrinkle with this method as opposed to using a machine to do this. And so I just not only had tears and rips and missing foil bits, but I also had those gaps in the foiling. So I turn to plan B for this frame, and that is just using some double-sided sticky tape. And I am going to do my best to align this sticky tape into a square to create a frame, and I am trying to tuck it around my other elements as I go, which was a little bit of a challenge in and of itself. But I'm lifting the paper liner just at the corners as I overlap the edges of the squares so that I don't have sticky tape just exposed everywhere. And I'm going to prop up any overlapping bits and then just foil one portion at a time so that I don't have, like I said, a lot of exposed stickiness everywhere to cause further problems. And I do trim down my foil to try and get a better coverage here to make sure that I'm covering everything. And one tip from this technique that I realized is that if you burnish this down with your fingernail, it actually removes some of the sheen of the foil. So I recommend just rubbing it flat with your finger so that you get the actual shine from the foil. At any rate, I was happy enough with that result, and I finish up my block up here, which is my title block / intro to the rest of the layout. And as I finish that up, I look towards my next bit of foiling, and that is to outline areas of these other blocks on the layout. So notice that most of my blocks are in tag form, and those, like I said earlier, are breaking up the different days of the event. And so I am outlining a whole bunch of stuff with this Quickie Glue Pen, and this is one of my favorite glue pen products. I love it for foiling, especially because you can just add touches of foil to projects. And just a quick tip with this is if you go slowly with the glue pen, you'll get a better coverage of glue. And once it dries, you can go ahead and put foil on top of it because it does dry a little bit tacky. That allows it to pick up and grab the foiling. And you can see I'm starting to foil here because as I finished up page 2, page 1 was already dry because it dries that quickly with, just this small thin line of glue. And if you have any spaces in there where it either didn't dry completely and you smudged the glue, or perhaps you just didn't get full enough coverage, you can just add a little bit more glue, let it dry, and then go back and refoil those areas. So that technique worked out pretty much as I expected, and I'm trying to show you here, tipping it into the light to try and catch the shine of all the foiling I have added so far. And ignoring the shine on the photos, I'm hoping that you can see well enough the shine that this foiling adds. And in person, it looks way better than the camera can possibly pick up. And then I'm ready to move on to the next bit of foiling, for which I had 2 ideas. That frame that I ditched earlier, I thought I could just cut out the good portions and create these little labels that will go for each block, and I will add some wording to those with some letter stickers. But what I really wanted to do was do this foiling process with heat embossing powder, and this totally worked fine in my technique video. But when I got to doing this with this layout, I was having a lot of problems. The embossing powder I was using was just melting kind of into a puddle, and I was losing details. Plus, I don't know if it wasn't melting completely, but I was getting gaps in my project. And as you see me here, I keep lifting it up and looking at it, and I keep not being satisfied with it, and I keep adding heat to it, and it just really isn't going well. You can see the gaps there. You can see this is supposed to be kind of a pennant banner, and the edges of that just became blobby. And so I am trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing wrong with this technique. And this actually brings up a bigger worry because I had done this exact same technique on the background of my layout in other areas to add a sprinkling of detail. I was adding some word stamps, some heart stamps, and some other detail stamps. And as you see here, I've got my foil and my iron out because I wanted to detail those areas. And then I realized, oh, I can't iron over my photos. So that was another mistake that I did. Any background foiling you're going to do with heat, you have to do before you put photos on your project. So I was trying the other variant of this. Instead of using an iron, you can just reheat the embossing powder with your heat tool and then just burnish it down with a scratch piece of paper and your fingers. And again, because this was using the same technique I had tried to do with those little pennant banner embellishments, it was just turning into blobs or not picking up enough of the foil. And again, the stress that I was having about this technique not working how I had done in the technique video was starting to worry me. I was worried I was giving you bad information on that technique video. So I ditched that process for now, and I go back to repurposing that frame that I made previously, just cut out the good portions of it and use those to create my little title banners for each of my layout blocks. And I'm going to pop those up on some foam tape to give them a little bit more dimension. And then it's time to go back and tackle the background problem that I was having with that heat embossing technique. And as I work on this section of the layout, I start taking a look at it, and it's really not making me happy. Those words there are just blobs and you can't really read them. And I try a few different things and none of it is working. So I come up with plan B, and that is to do a heat embossing technique over the foil. So I use the same word stamp. I use some oxide ink, which acts like pigment ink, which will hold a clear embossing powder. And so hopefully I will get those words to read more clearly with the foil acting as a shadow layer in the background. And it works okay. It's not fabulous, but I think it rescues the project enough that I can move on. I had intended to do one more foiling technique, but I was feeling pretty worn out at this point, so I'm just throwing on some sprinkles of embellishments and I'm going to call it good. I might go back and do that foiling technique after I've had a rest and, kind of re-energized myself for this process, and the photos here will show what I ended up with at the end of today, but maybe later in the month I'll be able to show you if I do go back and add more stuff. But I had this last thought before you go, and that was on that embossing powder technique. I pulled out the exact same products I used in my technique video and redid this process to see what I could have possibly have been doing wrong. And it turns out it was really the embossing powder I was using. So not any old embossing powder will work for this technique. I'll put up on the screen and in the show notes the 3 that I did have success with. So if you want to give this technique a try, you will have success too. So that does wrap it up for today. As we take a look at these close-up photos on the way out, I want to say I hope you appreciated me keeping it super real today on the channel, because when I thought about ditching this video, I had to stop and remind myself that I want this channel to be real, to be about real crafting, real mistakes, real recoveries, and real life imperfection, because I think the internet is too full of just the perfect moments. So with my philosophical ideas out of the way, I will say that I hope you have an imperfectly artful day. Until I see you next time.